Hi everyone. We are working on the expressive pumpkin composition project, and we're working on watercolor paper because the bulk of this project is with watercolor paper, but we're starting with pastels, and we're going to be practicing. The big size of the watercolor paper is for the final part of the project. The smaller size, but not the smallest, so the medium size paper is for the second practice, and the two smaller pieces of watercolor paper that are long skinny strips are for the first part of the practice with oil pastels. You might have gotten 4, but you only need 2 for this, so if you only got 2, that's great, but if you've got 4, you have 2 more than you need. So we're going to be using those 2. And you need to label them. Use a pencil. It can be your HB pencil or a regular pencil, a mechanical pencil. And we're going to label them with the types of watercolor washes that we'll eventually be using. But we want to do that before we do the oil pastel practice because we could smudge our practice when we're writing if we're not careful. So with our first one, we're going to label it up at the top of one of the pieces of paper, graded wash. So it's Gradedwash, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully you can read it. But right up at the top, Gradedwash. That's just for one of them. Now let's fold that piece of paper in half. Okay, fold it in half like this and back this way. So it's got a nice crisp fold that separates the top half from the bottom half. On the bottom half, we're going to label it Variegated wash. I'll show you both of these after I'm done. Variegated is Variegated wash, W-A-S-H. All right, so here's variegated wash. If you need it longer, just pause your screen, okay? And then here's the graded wash. So this sheet is going to be the second sheet that we work on. Put that out of your way, and on the other piece of the long skinny paper at the top, we're going to label it flat wash, okay? Flat, F-L-A-T, W-A-S-H. All right, so it's a flat wash. Once again, pause your video if you need longer. All right, so now that those are labeled, we're going to start, like I said, with the flat wash. And with the oil pastels, I hope you were in class. If not, I want to remind you, always keep your pastels in the tray when you're not physically making a mark with them. That way they're less likely to roll off your table and drop and break or get lost or get ground into the floor. So I like to keep them sitting on top of the lid just like this at my workspace. That way everything is right there where I want it to be. We're going to be using any color that you like from that for our practice work today with this strip. All right, so I chose this brown mostly because it's one of the few that's left that's dark enough for you to see that still has a nice edge to it, and it's a really pretty brown too, right? So I want you to choose your favorite color from the tray for this. Notice that it's a cylinder. It's got a round edge and long and rectangular otherwise, but it's based on a circle, right? So we call that a cylinder. At one edge, it's more exposed. The oil pastels are there, and we want to hold it on the paper at all times to keep the oil pastels off our fingers so we don't transfer the oil pastels around. Have a towel or a paper towel to keep your fingers clean while you're working, after you put the pastels down especially, or when you start with a new pastel or move papers around. We're going to be using where the top of the pastel meets up with the side at an angle, a 90-degree angle. We're going to use that for a thin line and a light line. Where it's the flat edge here, we're going to use that for a thick line and a dark line, okay? And we'll roll them to do a line that changes from thick to thin, dark to light as we do it, all right? So using it on its edge, like I just said, you're going to draw a line that goes from just below the label, near the left-hand side of the paper, and halfway down the paper. So it's a vertical line with light pressure. Don't press hard. Long, continuous, straight line. And stop. So that's a nice, thin, light line. Okay? My next step, you can watch and pause, but I'm going to go forward. All right. Next step is I'm going to take the fat edge of the full end of it, and I'm going to use it to push lightly to get a thicker light line. So those are two different line qualities, thin and thick, but also two others, light, or one other, a light line. All right. Now we're going to press a little harder with it on its point, where the top meets up with the side. We're going to press harder to make a darker line. Don't press so hard, though, that you break it. It's easy to break this material because it's a very soft material. Hopefully you were in class when we talked about its inherent qualities. Okay? So that's a darker line than either of the two previous because I pressed harder. Let's do it with the flat, round end. Do the same thing. Oh, by the way, when you're pressing harder especially, hold it closer to the end that you're using the pigments coming from. If you hold it in the middle, you're going to break it. If you hold it near the end, you're definitely going to break it because the pressure between there and there is increased in the middle of the stick when you do it that way rather than all of it being right there. All right? So I'm going to hold the whole end of it and I'm going to put it onto the paper. Hopefully my head doesn't go in the way. And I'm going to press harder, but not too hard that I break it. And that line is thicker and darker than these lines, right? So that's part of the way that you can change the line quality. Remember, we're using these line qualities that we already developed with pencil, but now we've changed the medium to a oil pastel. And because of the difference in the inherent qualities, the looks of the lines, even though they're the same line quality, the looks of them are different because of the inherent quality of the medium. All right, let's make our next set of lines. Down here, let's do a curved line. A curved line changes direction. Let's not press hard, but make it a little darker than that one. So just a little gentle pressure and make an S shape with your line. All right? An S curve is a really long, sinuous, gradual, graceful, organic line. Now let's do another line that has angles to it. Angles, direction changes are more abrupt and more agitated looking, right? These lines feel natural and free-flowing and easy. Geometric or angular lines feel more aggressive and more energetic and more frenetic, okay? So with these, same kind of pressure. Make angular lines all the way to the bottom, all right? So you've got thin and thick, dark, thin, dark, light. Thick, light, thick, dark, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got curved and angular. All right, so once you've got that, take this down and put it off to the side. And now we're going to work on the graded and variegated. First at the top with the graded and then at the bottom with the variegated. So with that, we're going to change up a little bit. We're going to press harder and less hard. We're going to change direction, but we're also going to do what's called rounding, where you go from the corner at the top and side where it meets at a point. We're going to round it to its flat blunt end and then round it back to its corner again so that you change the quality of the line. It's a varying line or a changing line, okay? So, and we can add pressure changes into the mix too to make it even more complex. But let's keep it as simple as we can for now. This is called rounding. So I'm starting it at its point at the corner and drawing a line with medium pressure, and then I'm rounding it to its flatter edge and then back to its point again. Okay? So it should be a little thicker than that where I rounded it, but it's not quite as thick because I've already used a lot of that surface area when I drew my other lines. So I'm going to try it again, and you can too. We have lots of room here, right? I'm going to use it with a thin edge and then to its flat blunt and then back to its thin edge again. That's more expressive, more interesting to look at than our previous lines too. The changes make more visual interest for other people to go, whoa, that's interesting, rather than, oh, it's a straight line, whoop-de-doo, right? You want to make something that engages the viewer so they want to look more in depth at what you're doing. and maybe go, wow, that's really cool. All right, so now we've got the way that you manipulate the tool, right? We've done that. Let's make a pressure change too while we manipulate it. So we're going to have it on its point with light pressure, and then we're going to go to flat edge and press harder, and then lessen up on the pressure, and then go to light again. Okay, so thin again. So light pressure, thin, round it to its flat edge, heavier pressure, lighter pressure, and then back to thin and light again. Even much more expressive because of the varying change. The change is much more dynamic because of the pressure change added into the mix. All right, our last one, let's try changing it more than once. Okay, let's go from thin and light to thick and dark, back to thin and light, back to thick and dark. See how well we can do it. Okay, a little bit of a change. One continuous mark is not that easy to do. Takes a little practice. Okay. By the way, I should mention, only work on one side of your paper. Don't turn it over and do work on the other side, because you're going to press this onto the surface that it's sitting on, and it'll stick to it, or it'll transfer that pastel onto the other stuff. And if it's a surface that isn't easy to clean, it'll stain it. All right. Once you're done with that, put your pastel back in the tray. Anytime you're not physically using it, put it back in the tray for safekeeping so it doesn't roll on the floor. Clean your fingers really well with a paper towel or a rag. Oh, I forgot this part. Let's do that part. My bad. Oh, so pick up your pastel again. Hopefully you're smarter than me today. All right. Okay, so we're going to do two last lines. There are two big changes, or two different contrasting line qualities that we haven't done yet. And one of them is a curved line, which we kind of did with the S curve. But the other one's just a straight line that doesn't have any directional changes. It doesn't have any angles. It just goes one direction to another. So let's do the curved one first. Let's do a C shape where it changes in its quality. Let's press hard to start with, or harder, and then lighter as you bring it back around toward the bottom. So that's kind of a C shape, right? Or C line. Now let's do one that is just a straight line that starts here and goes down here. Let's start light here and press harder as we pull it down to the opposite corner. So lighter pressure and harder pressure. Where one goes over the other, that's called overlapping. And anytime you overlap something, it's more visually interesting. Anytime you have a change from thick or dark or thin to light, those things make it more interesting too. All right, even in a straight line, if you have a change in thickness and darkness, people are going to be more engaged. Put your pastel back in its tray, clean your fingers off, and then you're going to keep these together until we're ready to do the watercolor washes on top of them. Please go to the next demonstration video for the pumpkin practice.